The A37 uses 8th stage bleed air for air conditioning and defrosting. As the pilot, you have control over the temperature and selection of foot, body, or defrost air. You also may select ram air for cockpit ventilation. The air conditioning panel contains all the switches, levers, and knobs necessary for the operation of the system. We will discuss each switch individually in a moment, but first let us trace the flow of air through the air conditioning system. The air enters a system on the right through bleed air valves on each engine. A portion of the hot bleed air is channeled through a heat exchanger, where it is cooled by ram air and then directed to a refrigeration unit for further cooling. It is then mixed with the hot air for the desired temperature. A modulating valve determines how much air is directed to the heat exchanger and refrigeration unit. After being mixed, the air passes through a water separator prior to entering the cockpit. If selected, the air may be directed to the defrost tubes around the windscreen and canopy. Now we will see how the switches on the panel operate this system. The bleed air switches are self-explanatory. The on position of each switch powers a DC bleed air valve open to allow hot bleed air to enter the system. If electrical failure occurs while bleed air is on, it will remain on. If the failure occurs while it is off, it will remain off. When turned off, there is no air to the cockpit unless ram air has been selected. Turning the bleed air off is a good idea during flight through toxic clouds, such as napalm smoke, and during in-flight refueling to prevent fumes in the cockpit. The ram air lever should be in the closed position whenever the bleed air is on and during in-flight refueling. Selecting the open position opens the ram air door located just forward of the windscreen. This allows ambient air to enter the cockpit. The cockpit air temperature control switch is a 4-position switch which controls the modulating valve to achieve the right combination of hot and cold air in the cockpit. In the auto position, the valve is positioned by the cockpit air temperature control rheostat. This rheostat is AC powered and will attempt to maintain a constant cockpit air temperature. At idle power settings, the air conditioner will not keep the cockpit temperature constant with high or low outside temperatures. AC failure to the system fails only the automatic function. Positioning the cockpit temperature control switch to the full cold position moves the modulating valve to direct all bleed air through the heat exchanger and refrigeration unit. The hot position will allow the maximum amount of air to bypass the heat exchanger and refrigeration unit. Both hot and cold positions are spring-loaded to center and must be held to hot or cold until the modulating valve is in the desired position. The off position removes power to the valve, and it will remain in the last position selected. One technique used in high humidity areas to dry out the water separator is to select full hot when on the ground. In this position, the modulating valve sometimes fluctuates and may not go completely full hot until 100% power is selected. This will occur on takeoff roll and usually makes a very loud sound of rushing air. The cockpit appears and smells like it is filling with smoke. Many takeoffs may have been needlessly aborted, only to find out the system was working normally. A is the correct answer. Unless the ram air is open, all air, whether hot or cold, comes from the engine bleed air. C is the correct answer. You should not use a combination of air conditioning and ram air. Above the ram air lever are the air control knobs. These knobs, one for each pilot, control where cockpit air is circulated. When pushed in, air is directed to the piccolo tubes along the side of the seat. Pulling the knob out directs air just forward of the feet. It is possible to select any intermediate position desired. Normal operation of the cockpit air conditioning system is 1. Bleed air switches on. 2. Cockpit air temperature control switch automatic. 3. Cockpit air temperature control rheostat to desired temperature. And 4. Air control knob to desired position. The defrost knob, when pulled out, directs air to the piccolo tubes along the windshield and canopy bow. When pulled out, the ventilation outlets forward of the light rheostat switches continue to operate. However, the ventilation outlets at both ends of the glare shield will be turned off. The temperature of the air will be determined by the cockpit air temperature control switch or the rheostat. You do not automatically have hot defrost air. The defrosting system, when used, should be operated at the highest temperature possible to provide sufficient canopy heating prior to descent through moist air. B is the correct answer. Only the automatic function of the air conditioner is AC powered. C is the correct answer. Defrost air is bleed air. The temperature of the air depends on what has been selected on the rheostat or the temperature control switch. This concludes the air conditioning and defrost section of the system's course.